Chapter 35. Sylvia. Sean brought the desert runner to a stop, the whir of the turbines spinning down in a low hum, the rotors ticking over in a slowing progression. 14 children younger than 10, 8 mothers, 3 teenage girls, 2 teenage boys, 1 other male officer. 28 people in all were packed into the cab and rear bed. All they could fit in the mad scramble out of Fortinbras. Now not a single one seemed to breathe. The wall loomed over them, a sheer towering cliff with blank, implacable windows for eyes, crowned with red signal lights burning against the evening sky. Before daylight had faded, Sean had spotted plumes of dust rising to either side as other convoys of vehicles ran in parallel paths. They were other bands of city dwellers, bands of people fleeing the violence, bands of people who also thought to try their luck at the wall. People I convinced. We should have stayed together. But they had not. The flight was too haphazard, chaotic. Perhaps it was better this way, especially if he was wrong. Better their numbers were scattered. Sabrina, I hope you are right. He had not mentioned who had told him to seek the wall. His cadet, a girl, an outlaw. He had simply acted as if he were free of doubt, as a commander in crisis, which, for all intents and purposes he had become, ought to do. They had looked to him for security, safety, certainty. He would provide it. Until he couldn't. And Sabrina had afforded it to him. She had rematerialized like some phantom from a dream. It hardly seemed real, but there she was, in an alleyway with those children, bloody and bruised, the dust of the desert hanging about her like an aura. She was as he remembered her, and at the same time transformed. She had ordered him with such certainty, such authority, that he had simply obeyed, never doubting the truth of what she said. And she had kissed him. The thought still made his head feel light, and his hands shake. The entire episode was unreal, even more so than the insanity they had witnessed that day. He had to look occasionally at the 3 children sleeping in the seats behind him. Nani, Drim, and Amat, to convince himself the encounter had happened at all. Ryan, the other officer, was wounded and could not walk. They had strapped him to the frame of the runner and helped him sit upright and cover the rear of the vehicle with his plasma rifle. He wasn't going to be unstrapped easily. Other officers had remained in the city to help more survivors, or commandeer other vehicles to drive citizens to safety. So Sean knew he would have to get out and approach the wall himself, alone. His mouth was parched. He had not paused in their flight, not to rest, not to drink, not to retape his broken fingers or replace the bloody bandages itching beneath his suit. Reaching the wall was all that mattered. Go north, Sabrina had said. Go to the wall. Get as far from the city as possible. There will be people at the wall to help you. She had promised. He had believed her. Now they were parked at the edge of everything they knew, the edge of what habitable land was left on the surface of the planet, the edge of life. The daylight was running out, and he wondered if he had made the right choice. He reached for a canteen that one of the young women in the cab held out to him, and took a long drink. He knew he should conserve. They had no supplies, and if Sabrina was wrong about help, they would be on their own in the desert, with 29 requiring food, water, and shelter. If she were wrong, they might be wandering a long time, or an automated security system might shoot them after a few steps. If this was the last drink he would ever taste, he would at least savor it. He held the water in his mouth for a moment before swallowing. He replaced the cap and wiped his lips, tugging on them gently as if he could bring back the sensation of Sabrina's mouth. He handed the canteen back to the girl, a redhead, pretty in a plain way. She might have been older than her teens, for she had handled the children and other teenagers with a firm calmness that spoke of maturity. She had also helped him navigate, remaining resolute even as the runner tipped, and at times came close to rolling as they careened over uneven terrain. He pulled his blaster from its holster on the side of his seat as he stepped out of the runner. He closed the door behind him and motioned for the girl to slide over into his seat. "If they take me out, you turn this thing around and get out of here," he said through the window.
"I will,"
she said. As her lips parted, he noticed a gap where she was missing a tooth. He'd seen men in the boxing ring lose the same tooth, and for a second wondered at the girl's story before he stepped away from the runner and towards the wall. Gravel crunched under his feet. The wall stood in a bed of packed earth, the sides flaring outwards and the ground dusted with a powder of granular material that weathered off the surface. There was a door. The metal rusted at the base of the tower. Desiccated weeds grew in front of it. He and the girl had talked about the wall on their journey throughout the afternoon. The wall was automated, so it must be abandoned. The idea of people who could help them, preposterous and against everything they knew. But so was widespread madness, rebels filling the streets of Fortinbras and overrunning the head ministry. "Lies, Sean," Sabrina had told him. "We've been told so many lies." He had thought of driving to Lysander, but how did they know the same madness had not spread there, or that there would not be rebels waiting to ambush them on the coast road? Could there be something more, something else at the wall aside from an irradiated waste? Sabrina had convinced him. He had convinced others. Now they sat huddled behind him, waiting. He stopped halfway between the wall and the runners. If he was shot down here, he hoped the girl would have time to turn the vehicle and flee. Should have turned it around first. Too late for that. The windows above reflected the clouded sky. The sight brought him a sliver of hopefulness. Why have windows if there were not watchers within? He waved his arms and cried out, "Help! I have wounded women and children! Help!" The windows remained blank and empty. His arms grew tired, his voice weak. The weeds before the door rustled in the breeze. A dervish of sand spun up and collapsed against the face of the wall. With no response, he began to wonder if it was worth blasting open the door and sheltering inside. He was considering which setting would break through the metal when something on the far side struck the door with a bang. It swung open slowly, the metal protesting with a screech. Two men in gray suits, much like his own, stepped out. Their eyes were covered in visors, the same make and model as all security ministry officers. The sight of them was expected, and yet strange. Sean felt a rising bubble of incredulity in his chest. It escaped from him in a relieved laugh. "I can't believe it. She was right." Both officers aimed plasma rifles at his chest, but their fingers rested outside the trigger guards. Their eyes were covered by their visors. "Place your weapon on the ground and take 3 steps back," one said in a strangely accented voice. Sean obeyed. "I have women, children, and 1 officer. He's also armed." They moved closer. One officer picked up Sean's blaster. The other zoomed in on his face with his visor. He asked Sean to pull down the skin below his eye. He did so, and after a moment his interrogator lowered his rifle. "How many in that runner are 39 or older?" "I'm not sure. Maybe 3 or 4. Any confusion or violent outbursts among them?" "We're all confused. They are all scared." "No fighting among them? No attacking?" "No, but plenty in the city. People are going mad." The men nodded and one spoke into his communicator. "Clear." A dozen figures, women and men, filed out of the doorway. They carried medkits, wore white coveralls and blue helmets, much like the officers. A woman who seemed to be in charge asked Sean a battery of questions. How many in the runner? How many children? How many wounded? Any visibly sick with infectious diseases? They all spoke with such strange accents, some of which he could not understand, and the 2 men in patrol suits had to repeat some of the questions for him. He tried to remain focused, but the strangeness was disorienting. So many people from within the wall. The confusion must have shown on his face.
"Everything you know is inside the walls here?"
one of the men said, now looking at Sean with naked curiosity. Sean took a moment to absorb the question. Inside? Of course, inside. Did that mean there was an outside?
"Yeah,"
was all he could muster.
"You all part of the ministry?"
"The what?"
one said.
No, we're not,"
the other said. He lifted his visor so he could look Sean in the eye.
"Brother, you are going to have to be strong. A lot is about to change for you."
We've been told so many lies. Sean was unsteady on his feet. His gut, down to his bowels, felt as it was roiling with poison.
"I'm afraid I don't understand yet. We can't really say more. Protocols on how refugees are supposed to be debriefed."
Refugees. Sean turned the word over in his mind.
There were survivors after the cataclysm, weren't there? You all are from the other side.
The officer nodded. Sean did not remember sitting down, but found himself on the ground, his fist to his mouth, willing his head to stop spinning, his stomach not to turn inside out. The two men were immediately on the ground beside him. One called over a female medic. She chided them.
"Too much, too soon."
The closest one scoffed.
"They are going to learn sooner or later. None of it's going to be easy."
Sean insisted he was all right, even though it was a lie.
Just let me know as you let the others know. Tell me as you tell them. I don't want the knowledge alone."
A medic gave him a cup of warm liquid that did not wash away the knot in his stomach, but calmed him so he could stand again. He thanked the men in patrol suits who appeared to consider him a sort of brother in arms. But Sean wasn't ready to have his world dismantled so quickly. They intimidated him, and, like a child, he yearned for something familiar. He walked back to the runner, mumbling about checking on the children. The medics had helped almost everyone out of the runner. Ryan, the wounded officer, was last, and they were moving him into a stretcher. His traveling companions now wore blankets protectively about their shoulders, though it was hardly cold. The runner's cab was abandoned, an emptiness that struck Sean as overwhelmingly sad. He steadied himself against the door frame.
"You all right?"
The red-haired girl had come up without his noticing. Unlike the other refugees, she had not taken a blanket. Instead, she held a clutch of water bottles in her hands. She gave one to Sean. It tasted a lot better than the stale water from his canteen.
"They are survivors of the cataclysm,"
he said. The young woman nodded, her eyes unblinking.
"You're not shocked?"
"Nothing shocks me after what we saw in the streets today,"
she said. Sean poured some of the water from his canteen into his hands and rubbed away dried blood. Some was his. The adhesive on his fingers gave out, and the tape began to peel.
"You should have them look at those,"
the girl said. She reached for his hand, but never touched it. There was a searing flash from the south. Evening turned back into day, a long, sustained blaze of lightning. Sean felt heat on the side of his face, as if he were next to a heater grill. Shadows stretched for the north, for the wall. Medics shielded their faces with one hand and tried to cover the faces of the refugees with the other. Sean had to turn his eyes away as well. The light was overpowering, like a star come to rest on the seam of land and sea that was Fortinbras.
"Isa,"
the girl said. The light faded and the sky glowed as a swirl of white cloud loomed upwards, red from within and punching through the dark thunderheads. The faces of the storm clouds were cleaved apart and rearranged in ragged precipices. Lightning flashed at the boundaries between storm and the churning updraft. The heavens were at war with themselves. Thunder followed, a rumbling boom that came on like an ocean wave, shaking the ground so much that even the runner rocked on its suspension, as if it were rolling across the ground at full speed. Some of the children began to cry.
Christ, Sabrina, you better be safe.
Sean winced as the redhead began to unwrap his fingers.
Just like that, back to my fingers. Fortinbras may have just been leveled.
But we are safe. And so are all the people you got out, she said. You did what you had to do. Now I'm doing what I do. You did your job. You saved us.
She turned her head to look at the wall. In both directions, other runners were rolling up to the wall's base in clouds of dust, while white-clad medics and gray-suited soldiers spilled out of doorways along its surface.
Sabrina saved us.
Who?
My friend. Told me to get to the wall. Then I told everyone else.
Then she saved a lot of people.
She gestured towards more runners approaching the wall in the distance, refugees clinging to their sides and rooftops. There had to be dozens of runners, maybe even 1,000 people. Refugees. She began unwrapping his other fingers, using the remaining water in his canteen to unstick the tape. Sean would not have admitted it, but he was glad for the touch of another person.
You weren't scared this whole time?
He said. The girl shrugged.
You didn't seem to be either.
I was. I just couldn't show it. It's my job, like you said. But it's not yours. Just ice water in your veins, or were you going into shock?
I'm fine.
She said it convincingly. She held his unwrapped hand still in her own.
I was scared for the kids. I did not want them to get hurt. But I knew I was going to live.
How?
I don't have my own kids yet. Maybe now I do, she said, nodding to the 3 children Sabrina had given him.
2 medics were bent over them. Amat, wide-eyed and alert, held Drim. Nani sucked her thumb, and Sean was glad to see a female medic wrap her in a blanket and take her in her arms. The redhead continued. A weird girl in school once told me I'd grow up. She had visions a lot. Told me she saw me with kids, my own.
The vision of a ranting kid off her medications gave you solace?
The girl stared out into space.
She was right about a lot of things. In a pinch, I needed something.
What happened to her?
I don't know.
She touched a finger to her lip for a heartbeat.
Wish I'd been kinder to her.
The medics came over and urged them through the opening in the wall. The women and children wrapped in blankets were already disappearing into the doorway as the 2 armed men stood by protectively, their eyes fixed on the turmoil in the sky over Fortinbras. The girl said she wanted to check on the children.
Come on, we'll retape those fingers.
In a minute.
Sean looked back at the cab of the runner, its seats still indented with the phantoms of its passengers. His canteen was empty. He tossed it on the runner floor and slammed the door. It clattered inside, like a pebble in an empty shell. The sky above Fortinbras was still reeling. Lightning cracked the cloud faces while mist eddied at their feet. He could feel a swirl of dust and raindrops on his cheeks. He closed his eyes, his lips moving with silent thoughts before he steadied himself on the frame of the runner and kicked the tires, dislodging dirt caked to his feet. Fat flakes fell to the earth. Sean let go of the runner, turned his back, and walked toward the open door.